Hello. Today we're going to be replacing a front strut on a 93 Subaru. We're also going to be doing the ball joint while we're in there. So we have our new front strut assembly and our new lower ball joint. We're going to be using some wrenches. We have to take the brake line out, so we're going to use a brake line clamp and a couple sockets. So to remove the strut, we have to remove a few other things. First, we're going to start with the caliper. The brake line goes through the strut. You can't see it very well, but it's a solid hole, or a solid piece around the hole, so we can't just slide the brake line out. We're going to have to actually disconnect the brake line and separate it. We're going to use our brake line clamp to clamp up at the top so that we don't lose brake line in the system and have to do a bench bleed on the master cylinder. And then the lower ball joint is part of the spindle, so when we have the strut out, it'll be much easier for us to pop off. We're going to have to pop the tie rod end off as well, just so that we can move our spindle around a little bit easier. When we remove everything else, the rotor is just going to come off and set off to the side, so it's not in the way and it doesn't fall and break any toes. And then we'll start doing reassembly after we get our replacements in. So we removed the brake caliper. We had to remove the line from the back of the caliper because the union was not separable. This caliper, the way it's designed, is a swing up, so the top of it is up here, and you can see there's two bolts. We didn't have to remove those because we were removing the whole assembly. The assembly's mounted on the bracket. There's two bolts on the bracket that go to these two spots on the spindle. Now, after we had that out, the rotor just wanted to fall off, so we moved that out of the way, made sure it didn't hit anybody in the foot. And then we started taking off the clevis bolts for the strut. And when we did that, we also had to remove the tie rod end from the spindle. So now we have a loose strut and a spindle that's only being held on by the lower ball joint. There's a clevis bolt for the lower ball joint that we have to take off. Then we'll be able to rotate the spindle around and get the lower ball joint out of there and replace the lower ball joint, spin it back, put it back in, and tighten it back up with the nut underneath. We don't have to do anything with our tie rod end. It's nice and good. It springs back, stays steady, but our lower ball joint is a little loose. The strut still has three bolts, or three nuts up in the top that we have to take out before we can drop it out, and we'll probably end up doing that at the same time we do our lower ball joint so that we have more room to deal with the lower ball joint. Alright, so we removed the three bolts from the studs up top, and now we have the strut assembly out. You can see the bellows has a bunch of oil on it, that's why it's shiny, and our strut is a little dirty and worn. There's a bearing up at the top here, so it's going to be part of the assembly process when we go to take it back and put it back together. We went ahead and did the spring compression tool for the strut springs. They have a safety mechanism on them that's a little threaded rod with a hook on it that'll keep this from dropping loose, and it's double-ended on the bottom. Now, these are a little bit scary to use. They don't look like they sit on there right, but we do have them grabbing on. They are holding the spring down from where it should be. You can see the space difference here and here. So this end is not compressed right here. Same with the top end. So that keeps this strut assembly from blowing out when you try and take the nut off the top. Now on the top, we have their bearing. There's a washer between the seat, the upper seat here, and the bearing. And you can see there's a ball bearing in here. And then there's the three studs that were onto the chassis. Now the reason this has a ball bearing is because the strut turns with the vehicle, or with the wheel when you're turning the wheel. This is the nut that was actually on this threaded rod of the strut, and that holds all of that stuff together, just this one little nut. You can see this strut was blown. It shouldn't be able to collapse that easily under the weight of my hand. So it's a good thing we're replacing it. Alright, so we have our strut removed. We got our ball joint loose from the bottom. What we had to do is we had to loosen up the nut, get it flush with the end while it's threaded on there, and then give it a smack up because we didn't have a ball joint spreader. But you got to do it with a hard hammer, not a soft hammer, and then it'll pop free, and then you can just take the nut the rest of the way off. But this ball joint is bad. You can see it's loose. The boots are all torn, and if you look at this one, I can't even really move it. And this is going to be our replacement. It's going to go in here. We're going to take this bolt out. That bolt's going to ride in this little recess and hold it in there. And then we get to put this back in the bottom of the control arm, right here. And put the nut underneath, and then there will be a cotter pin that goes through the hole in the threads of the ball joint. And then we'll have a brand new, nice and safe and good ball joint. So now we've switched out our ball joints. We have our new one in here, which you can see I can't even move even when I have this right up. But the old one is loose. It's got some excessive play, so it made noise every time you went over a bump. It would chatter, and well, it's just not good. So we've got our clevis bolt right here. This goes through here. Like I said, this little recess here is where this bolt's going through, so it's lining up just like that on the inside here. And then once we tighten this up, our ball joint will be in place. We've got our strut assembled, ready to go in, and we're going to put the strut in through here, line it up with the stud holes up in the top, start those, and then we'll flip the rest of the spindle assembly in the right alignment for it, have it ready to get lined up and put in there. In this car, since it's a 93 Impreza, the top bolt has the camber adjustment, so we have to readjust our camber back into the witness marks that are on here already. Thankfully it's an older car, we didn't have to mark it. The witness marks will do our job for us. And once we do that, we'll get to road testing. Got everything all buttoned back up. We got our old ball joint here with the blown boot, floppy. Got our old strut. This is supposed to be standing out on its own, but it's completely shot. This causes the wheel to bounce up and down violently, which actually probably caused this to fail now too. So we had to replace them both. The car would kind of bounce hard over any kind of bump you'd hit, and we bled the brakes already thanks to our handy little speed bleeder. We didn't have to do much to do that, and got our bolts all tightened up, got our alignment line back up, brake calipers tight, tie rod end, the ball joint nut, and the 3 stud bolt nuts on top. So now we get to put the wheel back on and go for a little test drive.